Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I have a few quick reminders to cover before we go ahead and get started. We like to keep our webinars conversational, and we welcome your questions throughout the webinar. You could send the questions to the panelists through the Q&A button located on the bottom of your Zoom control panel. We will try to answer as many as we can live, but if we don't get to your questions, we'll make sure to follow up with you afterwards. Additionally, we will send a link to the webinar recording within the next 24 hours. So be on the lookout from our marketing team for a follow-up email with the recording in that. All right, let's go ahead and get started while people are still joining. As a marketer, the great mystery behind Google's consistent algorithm updates can be both frustrating and intriguing at the same time. Google typically announces large algorithm updates ahead of time, which in turn prompts discussion and much speculation among SEOs and website owners. This speculation can spark misinformation, confusion, and false guidance. It's crucial to pinpoint exactly how these updates impact your organic search visibility to ensure you're maximizing your website's potential reach. While we can't know for certain what algorithm updates will come next, we can revisit the abundance of previous updates to identify common patterns and predict how Google search will continue to evolve. Today, our friends at NP Digital will help us demystify how Google search algorithm updates work and why Google frequently updates its ranking systems by looking back at some of the most recent impactful updates to take place over the past few years. My name is Chelsea Alves. I am the Senior Content Marketing Specialist at Rio SEO, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Joining me today is David Shapiro, SVP of Earned Media US at NP Digital, and Luke O'Leary, VP of Earned Media UK at NP Digital as well. Would you both mind briefly introducing yourselves and your background? David, I'll have you start first, and then Luke.
Awesome. Thanks, Chelsea. So yeah, my name is David Shapiro. As mentioned, I'm the Senior Vice President of Earned Media at NP Digital. I've been doing SEO for about 15 years. Most of it agency side. Have also spent a couple years client side in-house. I also operate some of my own sites as well on the side. So really looking forward to this conversation and this presentation. I'll pass it over to Luke.
Thanks. I'm Luke O'Leary. I'm the VP of Earned Media for the UK division of NP Digital. I've been in marketing for about 10 years, going back and forth between agency and in-house. Very excited to talk about anything that's related to the future of marketing, because that's one of the most interesting and exciting aspects, especially when we look to build our roadmap for success, not just looking at the next year of 2023, but everything long forward standing of the next 5 to 7 years.
Cool, awesome. Thank you both for being here again with us today. I'm going to hand it over to both of you now to walk through your presentation, so we can go ahead and get started.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks again. And the focus of today's presentation is Google's algorithm updates and how you can prepare, predict, and protect your website for visibility in the future. And so what we're going to be covering today are the top ranking themes over the past few years, predictions for some future updates, and then how to optimize your content today to make sure you're avoiding any negative impacts from future updates and setting yourself up for success going forward. So when we think about where to begin, we want to look at what the themes have been from the past, right? And the only things that are guaranteed in life are death, taxes, and Google updates, right? So, we've seen Google continually, just update the way that they rank websites. So going back to 2017, it was a little over 1,500 algorithm updates, if you will. And then as recently as 2021, there's about 4,500 or so. 2021 is the most recent year that we have data for. They haven't released 2022's numbers yet, but really, there's about 4,500, maybe, about 4,500 or so updates every year, right? Which is, more than 10 a day. So if you think about that, just on its own, it's in some ways overwhelming, right? I mean, they're consistently changing the way that they evaluate websites, and then consistently changing the way that they rank pages based on what they believe users want. So Google is constantly looking at what users want. They're constantly evaluating how websites meet that criteria and then changing the algorithms accordingly. So this is something that is going to continue to, be true. And Google is going to continually evaluate how they can better understand what users want and align websites to those things. And there's been, if you go back to 2022 specifically, there's probably about 9 or 10 core, announced updates, right? So going back to the page experience update for desktop, early on in February of last year, but all the other ones really fit into these 4 buckets, right? There were 3 product review updates, 2 core algorithm updates, 2 helpful content updates, and 2 spam updates. So those are the broad level buckets that Google has, really started to focus on when they think about what it is they're looking for as it relates to how to be visible and what signals they're trying to reward. So product review updates obviously focused on buying terms, right? A lot of e-commerce websites are impacted by these. Core algorithm updates are really focused on, content and how well your website meets the needs of users. Helpful content, very similar in a lot of ways to the core algorithm updates, in which they're looking at the overall content quality of your website and whether or not it's helpful for users or whether it's written for bots. And then they've also started to, towards the end of last year, focus more on spam updates. And so these have focused a little bit on link spam, but then also on just lots of other types of broad spam in search results, right? So things that might be scams, or things that they might think are harmful to their users. Now, what's interesting is that they all haven't impacted the search results the same way. So one of the things that we've seen, and this was based on our analysis of, not only our kind of own websites that we look at, but also, what Rank Ranger has put together, because they look at, tens of thousands of websites. The most impactful from a search engine shakeup perspective, the amount of top 10 results that are actually different before the update and after the update, the core and the helpful content updates were the most impactful, right? So what you're looking at on the left are obviously the individual updates. And then on the right is a scale from 0 to 100 that reflects the amount of shakeup that existed in the search results based on that update, right? So they looked at the top 10 results that were ranking before and after. And then if they were changing a lot, the numbers are higher. And if they weren't changing that much, the numbers are lower, right? So you'll see that the May core algorithm update and the September helpful content update were the 2 updates that had the most shakeup. And then they were followed by the September core algorithm update and the December helpful content update that, were kind of the next 2 after that. So the top 4, right, were the 2 core algorithm updates and the 2 helpful content updates. And so it's not to say that the product review updates weren't impactful, because if you had an e-commerce site, almost certainly, you saw some shakeup from there, or for whatever reason, you were heavy in link spam, and you might have been impacted by those updates. So again, not to say that those weren't impactful in and of themselves, but overall, the core updates and the helpful content updates were a little bit more impactful based on the metrics that we were looking at. So, when you think about the core algorithm updates and what they were targeting, in a lot of ways, it's really, it's a lot of things, but starting with content quality and relevance, right? So what they're really looking to do is prioritize high quality, relevant, and useful content, right? And of course, that's going to sound very similar to the helpful content update because it is, right? But they're looking at not only the content quality and the words on the page, but what is the user experience, right? How are users able to interact with the site, and are they able to get the answers that they're ultimately looking for based on the queries that they did, right? I mean, Google is really good at understanding what users are trying to accomplish when they actually do these searches. And so they're able to understand how well your website allows them to actually do that. And that's in some ways how they classify the experience for the user on your site. There's also technical elements in there, right? So it has to load quickly, it needs to be optimized, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of that is how well it meets the needs of users. Google also really focuses on EEAT. I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with the concept of EAT, which was expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. More recently, they added experience, right? So experience is showing, that you have kind of a history of, working with the product or understanding what it is that you're talking about. And that's something that's new as of this week. And this takes place, or I should say, this manifests itself a lot in the product review update, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then last but not least, right, is backlinks, right? So the core algorithm updates really focused on rewarding sites that get links from high quality websites that are relevant to the audience and that, are aligned with what the users might be looking for. So those are the core algorithm updates. And you'll see that it's very similar in a lot of ways to the helpful content updates, right? So helpful content rolled out in August 2022. One thing that's interesting is it's a site-wide classifier, right? So what that means is it impacts the entire site, and they're looking at your entire site as part of it. So in some ways, it's binary, right? Your site either has helpful content or it doesn't. And so one thing to think about is how much helpful content or how much of your content is actually helpful. Is it written for users? And ultimately, is it something that people are going to be satisfied with when they actually look at it? So, they released it in August of 2022. They updated it in December of 2022. And again, as we saw a little bit earlier, right, these were really impactful updates. And so these were ones where we saw a lot of shakeup in the search results, and that Google was very deliberate about what they believed was, what was good content, and ultimately, or I should say, what sites had good content, and then what sites didn't necessarily have good content. And so some of the things that they were focusing on there, were again, staying on topic and really focusing in on a certain thing, demonstrating that firsthand experience, and then providing sufficient answers to searchers' questions, right? So again, really showing that you're an expert and that your users should, ultimately trust what you're saying because you're an expert with a lot of experience in the industry, right? And so there's a lot of ways to understand if your content is on the right track or if it's not, right? So, if you have an existing or intended audience, right? So one of the things that they've or that we've seen them try to demote in a lot of ways are sites that talk about everything, right? Now, of course, Wikipedia is always going to be there. They're just a monster, and they generally provide a good answer for a lot of informational queries. But outside of Wikipedia, for websites that really try to address a lot of topics, we've seen those websites do worse than other websites that are really focused in on a specific topic. It's kind of the idea of going deep versus going broad. So for the topics that you want to be visible for, how do you make sure that you're answering all the questions that people might have, and that you're really honing in on a specific audience that might, really be interested in that content, right? So also focusing in on that firsthand experience, right? And that depth of knowledge. So if you're creating product reviews, how do you show that you actually have experience with the product, right? I mean, I think there's ways to do that with how you write, talking in first person, things like that. But then also, showing pictures of yourself with the product and you using it, right? You can't really fake that. I mean, I guess maybe now with some of the AI tools, you probably can, but it's tough to fake, right? And so, the more that you're able to show that you have experience and that you have a depth of knowledge, the more likely you are to do well. Making sure that your site has a primary purpose. So again, having that, really core focus. And then that fourth point is interesting too. After reading your content, people need to understand and believe that they've learned enough, and they don't need to go back to the search results and go back to other sites, right? So one way that Google might look at that is similar to how Yandex actually looked at it. And the reason I'm talking about Yandex is there was actually a leak recently about all of the signals that they utilize. And of course, Yandex isn't Google, but there's a lot of similarity and a lot of things that you can learn. But they've talked about this idea of, the percentage of times that your website is the last website in the query chain, right? So if users are, going to your website at the end and they're not going back to Google and not going anywhere else, that's probably an indicator that they solved what they needed and your website was the answer to that question, right? So think about what is the journey that your audience is going through, and whether they're going to have to get information somewhere else, right? And if you think that they're going to have to go somewhere else, then maybe include that in your content in the first place. And then the last two, right, making sure they have a satisfying experience, and then that again, keeping in mind the guidance from the core updates. And so that's kind of how you can do it right. If you're doing it wrong, if you're really focusing only on content for search engines, you're producing content on lots of different topics using clearly extensive automation, right? I mean, if you plug your content into something like originality.ai and it's saying it's 100% likely that a bot wrote it, that's probably not good if that's all your content. If you're not adding a lot of value, if you're writing about things that are trending, but you don't have a lot of evergreen content. So, lots of different ways to do it wrong. And so, you really want to focus your content more on the green than on the red, right? So just be thinking about how you can really make your content helpful and good to users. And one, little kind of pro tip that I might give y'all that actually isn't necessarily a slide right here, but you can use ChatGPT to score your content to see if it meets these guidelines, right? So, you could take these guidelines and put them into ChatGPT and say, here are the quality rater guidelines. And then you paste in your content and it can score your content based on the guidelines and then rewrite it based on, how to improve it relative to the guidelines. And so, that's something that you can use automation for in AI for to actually make your content more useful based on the guidelines that Google is providing, right? And so we just spent a lot of time talking about helpful content and core updates. Obviously, there's a lot with the product review updates as well, right? So, here's where you need to evaluate the product from a user's perspective, right? Really understand the questions that a user might have, around the topic, and, be thinking about how you can answer those, right? I mean, we have some tools here at NP Digital. We recently acquired Answer the Public, which does a really good job of this, really understanding the landscape of a certain product and what questions people might have. But, you have to show that you're an expert and provide evidence that you're an expert, right? So show visuals, audio, other links of your own experience, share measurements and explain what sets the product apart from the competitors. And, I'm not going to go through all of these one by one, because Luke's going to also talk about in some ways how to make the content better specifically. But the broad idea is really have your experience show through, right? Have your expertise show through, and don't just create content that anybody else can create, right? The more that you talk about your own personal experience and your own expertise, that's something that an AI can't do, right? So think about, what can an AI create and how can you go above that? Because if you're only doing what an AI can create, it might rank for a couple months, but, someone's going to create it with an AI, and if they have more authority than you, they're going to outrank you, right? So really figure out how you can create your content to go above and beyond to ensure that, that you're setting yourself apart from, anybody who might be creating content with ChatGPT or really any of the other AI writers that are out today or that are coming out in the future. And then the last kind of update, but definitely not least, is the link spam updates, right? So, Google mentioned that they have something called Spam Brain. They debuted that in 2018. But one thing that's really interesting, I know in the SEO community, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of chatter about, links and what and their value overall, right? And so as part of one of the link spam updates, they came out and just said links still help us discover and rank results in meaningful ways, right? So there's a lot of conversation about, whether or not they're still valuable. We've seen time and time again, the value of good links is still overwhelmingly positive, right? I mean, they drive impact, they drive visibility. And as you know, visibility drives traffic, which drives outcomes. So it's still really important to focus on, a lot of the high quality links. Now, of course, Google has gotten better over time at understanding what a high quality versus low quality link is. And if your links have signals of being low quality, it's very likely that those links are not going to count. And your website may see a decrease in visibility as a result of that. So one thing that's a little bit different too, though, is that, Google is not necessarily as punitive as they used to be, right? Back in the day, maybe maybe like 5 years ago, actually, when Penguin was rolling around, when they released the Penguin algorithm update, that was actually penalizing websites that had a lot of bad links. We don't see that as much anymore. Now they're just going to discredit the ones they believe are low quality. So, the message here is to really focus on those high quality links. And the more that you're able to do that, the more likely you are to see increases in visibility. So, that should give you an overview of the 4 types of updates that Google had, right? Product review updates, helpful content updates, core algorithm updates, and, link spam updates. So those are the 4 primary topics in categories of updates over the past, few years. And now Luke is going to be talking about how you're able to really win the future and what you need to do in 2023 and beyond to ultimately be successful. So with that said, I'll pass it over to Luke to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, David. And that's one of the big things is how do you take this information and bring it forward in your strategy? But a lot of things David has talked about shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because Google has foretold us all this information well before they enact on it. A lot of their communications we've talked about before, like Think with Google, they've outlined exactly where they want to bring search. They've explained where they want to change the algorithm, what they want to reward. Some of the old adages have never changed. Content is king and content will always be king, but the big thing is it should be refined to helpful content is king. It's the same goal. Google's always wanted you to create helpful and valuable content. And the way you do it is instilling and satisfying the intent for users and making sure that they take something valuable from it. That's why when David was talking about utilizing part of the algorithm that says serve the answer that's best. So when a user can arrive and they see your answer, they can leave knowing that their question has been fully answered. That's so important, is giving them the value when they arrive on any of your pieces of content, all right, from any medium that you're serving it in. And that's really important because it's not just text-based content that is content. Content means so much more. The way that your users interact with that content is more than just the text that you're putting on pages. Black text on white pages is so very boring. We need to instill a lot of our content with rich media, imagery. A lot of users are looking for specific things to serve them in content, infographics, videos, and they're utilizing these also not only through the content you're creating, but different avenues of search. And search is continuously updating itself, and Google is changing the way the search results stand because users are evolving on the web in the way they want to digest this content. And that was really seen in recent years when there's been more videos watched by TikTok users than searches committed on Google. And that's massive because as the web starts to evolve and change, Google will continuously align itself with the expectations of users, those expectations of how they want to digest and receive their content, and which venues are the proper platforms for them to be able to get the information they need and interact with it. So you have to think about more than just creating informational content through text, but informational content that is best received by your users in the way that they're looking as a standard to receive this content and digest it. And that's really important because the different ways that you create your content help define your entity. That was a massive change about a decade ago when Google said they didn't want to do strings, no more keywords. They wanted to replace it with things, concepts, entities, and understanding not just the entity of what you're talking about, the product and services, the solutions you're targeting, but the entity of your brand. Constructing your content in a way so Google and your users can properly understand the services you provide and what topics you're relevant for. That's a big part of all of our content strategies and making them semantic content strategies in the way that Google can understand a query, so a concept, and relate it to your brand because it knows the authoritativeness and expertise you have shown around this topic to trust you with a high-ranking search result. And that's why it's so important to have an entity strategy when you're focusing on creating your content archive and your content database. What that means is creating and crafting your content to be able to speak authoritatively around certain topics and constructing them and connecting those topics together so that your content database expresses the authority you hold around these topics, building topical relevance. Not only doing that, but utilizing other strategies around utilizing structured data, such as schema, so Google can better parse the information you're placing on a page, because the better Google can understand the content, the better it can rank the content. And utilizing these aspects to make sure that Google properly understands the content you're pushing through, the answers you're giving to users, so they can relate that to your brand and understand your brand not just as a topic, but as an entity that is related to queries users are searching for on the web. And this is how you have to go deep with your content, as David was talking about, creating a lot of content that circles around the products you're looking to serve or the services and solutions you're looking to guide users to. So that bottom of the funnel content is really focused on transactional queries, really getting the user to convert with your brand. But you have to build content around those. Google no longer ranks pages in isolation, it's built within the context of your website. So that holistic search David was talking about, making sure that you expand and serve users not only through the funnel, but through a way that Google understands that you're hitting each of these points the user has through their query chains. Looking for both the broad terms, those vague general terms that a lot of users, the high monthly search volume are looking for each month, but also expanding that out. So you're going for content that is looking for expanded keyword universes, targeting those new searches. Google reaffirmed that 15% of searches are new. They've never been searched before. Those queries are unique. But we can create content that not only crafts for the longer tail, but looks for, by utilizing our own data, content that will be searched for in the future. We should know how our users are looking to search, not only about how they're searching in the current day. And this image you have in front of you, you can see on the right-hand side, is just a different perspective of looking at the old imagery of a funnel. It's the same concept. We're still looking at guiding users down the funnel, but is looking at our content in a way that expands and encapsulated all those users through their query chains. And that secret right there is the secret to success. It's a lot of the secret we've used in the past few years to win OMA's best search campaign, to get that three-peat. And it's not an open, it's a very much open secret. Both David, myself, and Neil talk about it on a lot of webinars. And the image to help keep that in mind for you so you can really conceptualize this concept is when we talk about Google no longer looking at pages in isolation, back in 2018 during the Medic update, which held a lot of volatility for the industry, we saw that Google looked away from looking at pages that were optimized for a query to sites that were optimized for a topic and how relevant they were. To be rewarded for your core topics, what you're looking for to guide users through transactions, you have to supply to Google that you are trustworthy, that you are supplying them with the information that they need to get to that transactional phase. Building out information that is to that core entity of what your company is about, what your brand is trying to serve. Doing the information that is directly related and building out layers of information around that through contextual relevance until we get to what I call the edge of aboutness, where things are just tangentially related, but they're still related to your core concepts and the core queries that users are looking for where you want them to transact. And through that, we can then build proper authority and expertise in the eyes of Google. When you ever see results in the search results, Google isn't just ranking that page, they're ranking the whole context of the website related to that query. So you're not just looking to rank a core topic, but all these circles in the concentric circle imagery, these layers of information, that's what Google is rewarding. And that's why ChatGPT has been such a massive change for the industry. Before, the creation of content was a barrier for a lot of brands to enter. They had to create a lot of content to create around what their users were searching for. But now you can create good content very easily through ChatGPT. But not only that, as David has expressed, you can utilize it as another member of your team, helping you edit and revise, helping you brainstorm. It's fantastic when you have some queries and utilize your keyword research to feed through ChatGPT, so it can help utilize making new content, but also expanding on the content that you were already creating and looking at new avenues of creating that content through different forms. So utilizing it as a new member of your marketing team. And Google has always been, the value is what they hold true. So automatically generated content that was only made with the intention of ranking is what they've always been against. They haven't been against AI generated content. And they've said in recent times, such as Danny Sullivan, saying the AI content isn't bad. They're okay with generated content as long as it serves value and it's helpful for the user. That's the main point. Is the content they want to rank needs to be helpful. It has to have the value. It can't just be all the same content being generated by different brands. And that's why it's so important to look at the content being created and making sure that your brand's voice is instilled in that content, but also your solutions are unique and they really talk to your user base or the consumers you're looking to rank for. And that's where the biggest thing with ChatGPT comes in through. Is the power that ChatGPT is to give you that first draft. Now, one of the best writers of all time is the best way to create your content. John Swartzwelder, one of the main creators from The Simpsons. So back in the golden era between seasons 2 and 8, The Simpsons was the peak of pop culture, commonly referenced by any other show in a lot of media. John Swartzwelder was one of the lead writers, created many of their episodes. And what he came up with was one of the best theories that I've heard behind writing when he did an interview with the New Yorker, which is writing is hard, but rewriting is easy. And that's one of the best ways to utilize ChatGPT, is to write that first draft for you. Give it an outline, feed it an outline, let it write your first draft, have your team go in, instill your brand voice, expand on your content, make it more personal so it stands out from all the other AI generated content, and just improve on it there. Because the power of the rewrite is how you're going to connect with both Google and your users.
All right. So yeah, obviously the idea of, creating useful content for your users makes a ton of sense, utilizing AI to help with that and help with the rewrites makes a ton of sense, but when you think about what to do with the content once it's done, really going wide as you can with the distribution, right? Like, how do you cast a large net around your content on places that your audience is spending time online? I hate to break it to y'all, but your website's not the center of the universe. People are always going to other websites to look at relevant content, to look at reviews, to look at what other people have to say. They're looking at things on Pinterest, Instagram, whatever it may be, to really understand what's going on in the industry and the category, and then they're using that to craft future searches, right? So they're understanding content that exists on these other platforms, and they're using that to maybe do different Google searches down the line. And so, think about how you go as wide as possible with your content distribution strategy, because it's not just enough to create great content that's good for users, but, you have to get links and you have to get people talking about it. And the way you do that is through these other platforms, right? And so one of the things that's probably worthwhile is identifying maybe 2 or 3 platforms that your audience spends time on and really learning the signals of those other platforms, right? I mean, we've talked ad nauseum thus far about Google and what we know about them, but like, for YouTube, it's how quickly, the video starts to rack up views and engagement, early on, right? LinkedIn is obviously big on comments and likes, Instagram, the post format matters, TikTok, video likes and shares, accounts follow, things along those lines. So every platform has their own algorithm, and the more that you're able to understand what drives success on those platforms, the more likely you are to have your content be surfaced on those platforms, which again, will drive direct traffic, will drive traffic from those platforms to your website, which will ultimately also help your ability to rank in Google. And I know I keep going back to it, but I think it's important. Yandex had unique classifiers called out in their leak about, TikTok specifically, links from Wikipedia, links from TikTok, links from Facebook, the percentage of direct traffic and all these different signals that show or try to at least understand how much your website is known outside of just search, right? I mean, if your only traffic source is Google, that's going to make it harder to rank in Google, right? And so in some ways, that is like a paradox, right? I mean, the more people learn about your product without like looking at your website or buying your product, the more people are going to want to buy your product, right? So if they see a lot of content about you in other places, they see other people talking about you, they hear about you from other sources, that is a signal to Google that there's conversation taking place around your product, there's conversation taking place around your brand. And guess what? The more conversations that Google sees happening about your brand on these other platforms, the more likely they are to believe that you're relevant, that you have the authority, that you have the expertise and the experience to rank well in their search engine, right? So, by doing better on these platforms, you're giving yourself the ammunition to rank well on Google, which is ultimately the platform that we're talking about today that we want to do better on. And another reason why you should be focusing maybe on some of these more visual platforms is because Google and search in general is becoming more visual. At one of their recent product releases, I think it was the most recent Search On event, might have been in August or September or somewhere around then. They came out with a lot of new SERP layouts, right? So if they believe that users want specific products, right? If you put the word shop in front of another keyword, like they're going to give you a lot of visual content, right? The example on the left, shop ceramic vase, it shows you all the different kind of ways that the SERP is laid out. And then on the right, these are all different types of products that they're showing you, right? So they're showing their own like the product carousel, and if they understand that users are trying to shop for certain products, they're going a little bit, or they're going all in on imagery, right? The visual components are huge. And so what's great about visual content is that you're able to take it and then put it on other platforms, right? You can put it on Instagram, you can put it on TikTok, you can put it wherever your audience is spending time on, on Pinterest, wherever it is. So, really leaning into the visual components of your vertical, I think, is a strategy that you should be taking seriously in 2023 and beyond, because if you're only using, ChatGPT to create text, that's great, but that's only part of the game. If you're also able to use ChatGPT to maybe create great product descriptions, but also align it with, imagery that shows the product itself, lots of different angles, and then shows you using the product, right? That's a great combination for success. And so, when you think about how to ultimately do better with visual content, right, you got to make sure, that your site, passes the mobile friendly test, have descriptive image file names, have kind of high authority pages, high quality content, and then ultimately, do whatever you can to increase your brand exposure, right? So lots of different ways to do better with visual content, and it's important and something that you should be keeping in mind in 2023 and beyond, right? So to recap everything that we've talked about today, really focus your strategy on staying aligned with what Google is trying to do, right? I mean, we talked about it before, they're trying to ultimately understand who's an expert, who has experience, who's an authority and what websites you should trust, and they're trying to understand what a good product review update is. They're trying to understand what helpful content is, and they're trying to understand how well your website aligns with what your users want. Right. So if you think about everything through the perspective of the user, what makes them tick, what makes them make decisions, and you create content that speaks to them over a long enough time horizon, you're going to do well. Right. So that's, that's pretty much a recap of everything that we spoke about. And so with that said, I think it's, we could open it up to Q&A, or I'll pass it back over to Chelsea.
Thank you both. That was a great presentation. I think you both shared a lot of unique information that marketers can take away and apply to their own strategy. I did see we had a couple questions, so I'll go ahead and address those. The first was, and she asks, how does Google identify helpful or unhelpful content?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the $1 million question, right? So, like, what are the actual specific classifiers that they're using? I'll answer this from a perspective of what's useful, and then also maybe what is true, because there's not necessarily a lot of overlap there. But so, what is useful is trying to understand what your audience is seeking, and what they're actually trying to understand by the queries that they're doing, and making sure that you have content that speaks to that, right? So, I'll just share this again. There was a slide that was talking about you're on the right track if, and those were actually pulled from Google's helpful content section of their their advice, right? So let me share this again. Sorry, I think this will be useful to answer the question. Can you see this now?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is actual guidelines from Google, right? That helps understand what helpful content is, right? So, clearly demonstrates firsthand expertise and depth of knowledge, right? Has a primary purpose, and that users are able to learn or feel like they've learned enough about a topic, and then they've had a satisfying experience, and then keeping in mind the core update. So this is from them, right, on how to create helpful content. Now, one of the things that's interesting is you start to think about, okay, well, what does that actually mean, right? And so, again, going back to things that we know are true from like either Google's documentation or even from that Yandex leak, which again has a lot of similarity from Google, right? Like, are users able to not have to go to a different place to follow up based on what it is they're looking for? Like, can you be that final answer to the questions that they have? Are people going to your website and then clicking through to other content, right? Are they not bouncing right back to the SERPs? Because that might be a signal that your content isn't necessarily answering the questions that people have, right? So, those are two things to think about. Another thing is, are you answering the question that users have directly right away on your content, right? So if the query is kind of long tail, right, that generally means that it's more specific. And if it's more specific, then you probably want to answer the question right at the beginning of the content, right? So if it's a question type of keyword, what, who, how, where, why, whenever, like, you have to answer that question right away. So that might be how they look at what's helpful. So it depends on the query type, but really be thinking about, what the intent of the query is, how specific it is, and then how you should, frame your content based on that.
Awesome. Another question, what about local algorithm updates?
Yeah. I mean, so we've definitely seen the core algorithm updates also have an impact on local. There's definitely been a few updates as well that speak to shifts in the GBP listings as well. But one of the things that we've seen be true is if you're able to make your website align with a lot of the core algorithm updates, the helpful content update, and have like really useful product reviews, if you're selling, products locally, there's a lot of overlap, within those. And at a high level, if you're able to accomplish that and do well there, it's more likely that you're going to be able to succeed in the GBP listings as well.
Okay, we have a lot more coming in, but I think we only have time for a couple more. Like I said, if we don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you afterward with a response. So let's just do two more. Aaron asked, I'd love if you all could please expand a bit more on the role of product reviews and Google search algorithms and rankings.
Yeah. Yeah, so the role of product reviews is obviously more important based on the based on what type of site you are, right? So if you are obviously selling a ton of products, then the product review in a lot of ways, the product review updates are going to be massive for you, right? But if you don't have a lot of products, then they might be a little bit less impactful. So they're looking at not only kind of the product reviews themselves, but the overall experience that you provide through like your PDPs, right? Your product detail pages, in kind of what that looks like. So I guess at a high level, what would recommend is, looking at maybe some of the top ranking websites that are in your vertical, see how they're using content, see how they're using or what their how their PDPs are designed, how they're actually doing product updates, and then maybe look at parallel industries as well and see what's working in those too. And then you can understand how to maybe design your product reviews and or your PDPs to better align with what Google's looking to reward. But product review updates are obviously big for e-commerce brands. The more that you're able to, again, align kind of the content of your product reviews with the helpful content update signals and the core algorithm update signals, the better off you're going to be. So I think there's a theme in some of the questions that I'm picking up. And I think at a high level, if you're able to align your website with the guidelines from the helpful content update, you're going to be in a good spot, right? So understand what those signals are that they're looking for, which we just walked through a lot of those, and then try to apply those specifically to your products as well, right? So show that firsthand experience, show your expertise through that. And the more that you're able to do that, again, over a long enough time horizon, you're going to do well. And the reason I keep saying over a long enough time horizon is because with the frequency that Google changes the way that they rank websites, you're going to go up and down, right? Like success in search is not linear, right? You don't just, it's not like just something that's up and to the right all the time. It goes up sometimes, it goes down sometimes, but again, the more that you're able to align with these signals over a long enough period, you are going to surpass your competition. So really, do what you can to align that criteria with your content. And again, just real quick, use ChatGPT for that. That is one of the most interesting use cases I've seen. You can literally paste Google's product review guidelines in ChatGPT and say, here are the product review guidelines, and then put in your bullets from your your product pages or like the actual content of your product review. And you can say, score my product description based on these criteria, and it'll do it for you. And then you can take a next step and say, okay, based on this low score, how would you rewrite this so that it gets the top score? And it does it. It's unbelievable, right? So, I think that's definitely something that y'all should consider trying to make sure that you're meeting the helpful content update guidelines for your e-commerce websites.
One thing I want to add in on that is really making sure you have the context of your products placed to both the user and Google. It's so important for Google to be able to understand what you're trying to sell, what you're trying to give the user. So not just the information you're putting in there, but the forms that you're putting into. So the different ways you structure your pages so that Google can understand the context of what you're trying to push through.
Awesome. And we'll just go through one last question. Regarding the emphasis on visual content in the SERPs, how would you recommend a service-based business take advantage of this strategy as compared to a product-based company, which already leans on visuals, images to promote products for sale?
Yeah, great question. I think that, there's a couple ways, right? I think like processes and flowcharts are kind of interesting, right? To really understand, like how y'all work, kind of what might separate you from the competition. Things like that are always good. And then, I think maybe not necessarily imagery, but video, right? Like for services-based business, like right here, we're on webinars, right? Really like kind of lean into video, talk about the differentiation between yourselves and your competition, right? What makes your service better than what might be out there? What makes you different? And you're able to get a lot of value from kind of that component of it. So I would say, maybe for service-based businesses, it's not necessarily imagery, but, more video. And then, from the video, you can maybe take, some images, screenshots, whatever, but definitely videos, thought leadership is really important, right? And then within the thought leadership, again, leaning into how you're able to take complex topics and simplify them through visual elements, I think is really important. One of the things that we talk about a lot when we're talking to prospective new clients is we're trying to simplify something that's complex, right? I mean, SEO in a lot of ways is just, you can make it really complicated because, when you start to get into the nuances, it actually is really complicated, or you can speak to it at a really high level and just try to paint a broad picture of, what are maybe the Pareto principle type activities, right? What are the 20% of the activities that drive 80% of the outcomes? And how do you kind of talk about those, So yeah, definitely lean into video, lean into webinars, and really lean into imagery, which helps simplify complex topics down. And I think that's probably one way to look at it.
I'd say really utilize those on your solutions pages or your services pages, and then make sure you're utilizing that on whatever informational hub you have. If there's a blog or a knowledge base, make sure that you're breaking up content with imagery. So it's amazing how many brands I still see that only use a hero image on their blog. And there's a thing called article fatigue. As a user reads through your article and it's just text, they want to leave, they'll bounce from it. Articles are a great way to break that up, give them a pause, but keep them engaged. So they're more likely to spend more time on your information, either getting an answer or connecting with your brand. And connecting with David was saying about videos are so important also in your blogs to give that supplementary boost of information. But we've seen in tests that we've run, blogs have a lot more engagement, both in the amount of pages done in that session throughout the blogs, so how deep a user is on your website, but also the time spent on site when you have a video ingrained inside one of your blog posts.
Awesome. Well, we covered a lot of ground today, so I think we're going to have to wrap up today's discussion. We hope you all found today's webinar to be useful. If there are any questions we didn't get to, as I said earlier, we'll make sure to follow up afterward. We'd also be happy to answer any questions you didn't get a chance to ask today. So just shoot us a note at hello@rioseo.com. I'd like to thank all of our attendees for joining today's discussion, and a special thank you to our awesome panelists, David and Luke, for taking your time to be with us today and sharing all this great information. Can you both let people know how to best reach you if they have any follow-up questions or want to connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. Just email me, David at NP Digital. Yeah, definitely happy to continue these conversations. Love talking about this stuff, and just thanks everybody for tuning in. So yeah, happy to continue chats or questions via email.
Same here. So if you want to reach me, Luke at npdigital.com, or find me on LinkedIn. One of the best ways to reach me. I'm normally pretty responsive on LinkedIn.
Awesome. We'll also be sending out a recording shortly, so you can listen again, or you can share this presentation with your colleagues. I know one person asked in the chat if we could send them a copy of this presentation in that follow-up email. Luke and David, would that be okay with you guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's a big file. So once we figure out how to get it over to you, we'll do that for sure. Probably, it might be a PDF version, which is fine. But
okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you both again. It was my pleasure to moderate today's discussion. We host these types of local search discussions every month, and we hope to see you all on our next webinar that's going to take place on Wednesday, March 22nd. So about a month from now. And on that webinar, we will be discussing the consumer behavior and local search trends that shaped the local business environment throughout 2023 based on our own original research. So you can sign up for that on our events page on Rio SEO's website. Thanks everyone again, and have a good rest of your week. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Bye.